would have to ask them to find out why they haven't done anything. But I can tell you this, I began to reveal information in 1976, and I was physically attacked on 2 occasions. My skull was caved in, that's where all these scars are here. On the second attack, I lost my leg. They visited me in the hospital. They had no intention of killing me. They were delivering a message to me. Shut up. And that was the message that came through loud and clear. And 2 men who identified themselves with identification cards who belonged to the Defense Investigative Service, which is really the Defense Intelligence Agency, asked me if I was going to shut up or they would have to do it right. And I told them, I said, you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to be a good little boy for the rest of my life, and I'm going to shut my mouth. And I did for 16 years. Kept silent until I saw this UFO magazine in a bookstore, which indicated that they had implemented the contingency plan called Majestic. But if you want to know what I think the reason is, I believe that there are several. One, they've had a plan that's been in force since the 40s to debunk, ridicule, destroy anybody who ever talks about these subjects. And the public has been thoroughly indoctrinated that if you talk about any of these things that I'm talking about, you're just another nut. So the public, by and large, doesn't pay any attention to it. So in that sense, I'm not a threat. If the president had come on television and said, hey, this is what's going on, then they would have listened and they pay attention to it. But people like me, they perceive me as being just another loony bin, fruitcake, and nut, which I assure you I'm not. But that's the perception that they've been brainwashed into believing. And so that's what they believe. Number 2, I'm so much in front of the public from the very beginning when I began to talk. And that's how I protected myself, or at least that's what I thought would protect me, and so far it's proven to be right, was that if I got literally in front of the public overnight, in front of a large public, that they wouldn't do anything to me because it would substantiate what it was that I'm saying. And they certainly don't want to do that. But also create a martyr. And martyrs create tremendously dangerous political movements that they don't want that either. So literally within a 24-hour period, I spent $27,000 mailing a thick packet of information all over the world to people I never heard of, didn't know. I went down and got some mailing lists and just mailed the stuff all over the world. And so literally, when people opened these packages in their mailbox, and it was a perfect plan because they couldn't stop it. They didn't even know I was going to do it in the first place. And since we sent it all over the world, once it was out, there's no way they could retrieve it. At least no way that I can conceive of. So literally within 24 hours, I was a public presence. And people were asking all over the world, who's Bill Cooper? Is this true? Look what I got in the mail. And just literally flipped the world over on its ear. And I've been in front of the public ever since. So I think basically those are the reasons. They don't believe that the public's really going to listen to me, and so far that's been true. There is a small group of people all over the world who are awakening, who are beginning to understand that they've been living their life in fantasy land, and who are actively seeking the truth. But by and large, when the secret power structure says, as I put in the first chapter of my book, right out of one of their own technical manuals, that a nation or world of people who do not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence, and thus are stakes on the table by choice and consent. They're absolutely right about the majority of people. It's one of the things that has been an illumination to me is that they're not always wrong. And many of their goals are the right goals, but the method that they're using to reach that goal is the wrong method. In other words, if you set out to create a perfect world where there will never be any more killing, but to reach that point, you kill 2 billion people, you have become what you're trying to avoid. And it can't happen that way. If you want to create a world of peace, it has to be done by people, not unless it wasn't destroyed at all. It was perpetuated by that very action. And that's what these men are doing. They rationalize everything they do so that they feel better about it. But what they are doing is becoming what it is that they want to get rid of. And the world will never be a safe place for anyone as long as there are men who do these things.
Very eloquently said. Thank you. Now, your message to people, once again, is don't believe anything. How is it that the public can find this and, search for this truth on their own if they can't believe anything or anyone? What
It's all in the public sector. It's all available to anyone who actively and diligently seeks it out. Everything that's in my book, Behold a Pale Horse, is everything in here, all the documents that are in here, everything that's in this book is in the public domain.
Can be substantiated?
Yes, and I intentionally wrote this book not using anything that wasn't available to the public to show people that, yes, if I can find this information, so can you. I have tons of stuff that's not available to the public. But as you can see by reading this book, you don't need that stuff because it's what you need is available to you. Public libraries are overflowing with the proof of what's really going on in the world, but nobody really utilizes it to the extent that they're able to pick this out and put it together. Another thing I've done for people is I've put it together for them so that they can see the overall picture rather than looking at small things and thinking that it's isolated. Nothing is isolated. It's all part of a big puzzle. And the puzzle is coming together. And when the puzzle is assembled, it's going to be a one-world totalitarian socialist government that nobody's going to like except the people that are running it. It's Hitler all over again. And the rationalization is we're going to create the world without war.
The utopia.
The utopia. But they will never create that utopia because they're not dealing with the problem that makes them want to create it. And that is the inherent flaw in each individual human being that makes us do the things that we do. Until that's overcome, there's never going to be a world without war or without rape or without killing or without robbery. And anybody that thinks that there is has already gone off the deep end.
So the method is, here, I'm going to hold a gun to your head so you won't rape, you won't kill.
That's right.
Yes, okay, I understand. The title of your book, Behold a Pale Horse, what significance does that have? What are you saying with this title?
This title is from the book of Revelations, because I have to tell you this, and you may think I'm nuts if you want to, but this is the truth. Either these men are following the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is in the Bible. They're either following it just like a plan and bringing the prophecies in there to pass to manipulate and control those who believe in those prophecies and neutralize them, so to speak. In other words, if this is written in the Bible and God has ordained it, who am I to resist? It must come to pass. So I'm not gonna try to stop it. Okay. What a perfect way to neutralize the opposition right off the bat. Or there really is a God, and what he said was going to come to pass is coming to pass. And I named this Behold a Pale Horse from chapter 13 of the book of Revelations. The fourth horse, the fourth horseman of the apocalypse is the pale horse. And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with the beasts of the earth. And that is taking place now today. The fourth horseman is riding across the world now. That's what AIDS is all about. That's what all these little brush fire wars all over the world are all about. That's what's happening. That's why cancer cures are suppressed, is because they fully intend to kill a minimum of 2 billion people by the year 2000. AIDS is an invention of man. It is not a natural disease, and it has been implemented and placed into the population as a population control. And when they did it, they had the cure before they did it. And when they deemed that enough people had died or been killed, will say, we have a cure for AIDS. And everybody will be called to report to some place to get an inoculation, which is going to do two things. One, it's going to stop AIDS in its tracks. And number two, it's going to implant a device which will be able to be used to track each individual person and maybe even to control those people. And that's what the pet implant program is all about. It's not about finding lost pets. They don't give a damn about pets. And they would never put a satellite in orbit to find a lost pet. But yet there's a satellite up there that they're using to find pets that have been implanted with these devices. They're testing this program on pets that's going to be used in human beings. And in the Los Angeles Times in 1989, they ran an article. It was 10 forecasts for the coming decade was the title of the article. I have a copy of it in my research center. And number 5, I believe it was number 5, in those 10 forecasts for the coming decade was chemical or electronic implants to control individual behavior on a 24-hour basis, unquote. So it's not hidden at all. It's there for anybody who wants to look.
But nobody's looking.
Nobody's looking. They believe, and I believe that they're right, that the biggest danger to mankind right now is man himself, population. A study in 1957 told them that by 1990 the world population would double in 33 years. Can you imagine that? The world population of human beings doubled in 33 years. And they knew that it's an exponential doubling throughout history. Every time it's doubled, the interval has gotten shorter. So that was 33 years. The next doubling will take place in approximately 28 years. The next one after that, approximately 24 years. Can you imagine if the world population doubles again in 28 years from 1990? In other words, in the year 2018, the world population doubles. And we're having problems with food supplies and timber and clean water and clean air now. And then after that, it doubles again in another 24 years. That's why they created AIDS. Because they didn't want to have to go around the world and say, you and you up against the wall, you've got to die today, and shoot them. They did it in a manner where they could target what they consider to be undesirable populations, and I want to be very clear that I don't agree with them on this. They specifically targeted blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals for complete eradication. And AIDS is really going through those populations, and it's really doing a number. Blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals.
That theory has made news. I've heard that before, and it's been debunked very clear by the public saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous." But you're saying that that may indeed be the case.
It's not ridiculous. I actually saw this in documents. The project name was Project Naomi. MK Naomi was the name of it. It was a CIA project. AIDS, whatever causes AIDS, whatever that turns out to be, according to those documents, was developed at Fort Detrick, Maryland, under a CIA project called MK Naomi. It was financed by $10 million for the Department of the Army's biological warfare programs. It was carried out, supervised by the CIA, carried out by scientists who worked for the Special Operations Division of the Department of Defense. It's doing its job.
And would you assume if AIDS doesn't work, there's a contingency plan for that even?
Well, I think that they have other things out there working concurrently. One thing I've learned about these men is they don't just do one thing. In case the public discovers what they're doing, or discovers that somebody's doing, whether they know who's really doing it or not, and stops it. What they have running is several concurrently running plans, so that if one or two fail, the other ones are going to take care of the problem.
It sounds pretty hopeless. I mean, based on that scenario, is there anything, any uprising or what?
Yeah, there is, but it requires that people wake up. It requires that they really learn the truth instead of live their life in fantasy land. You see, because nothing can exist without the consent of the people. Unless they buy it, it's not going to happen. And all of these plans lead to the public's ultimate acceptance of what they're going to do. In fact, they're designed to make the public ask for it. For instance, the burning of the rainforest in Brazil. I know people who are just up in arms. Stop this. We got to stop the burning of the rainforest, which is exactly what the burning of the rainforest is designed to do. Because Brazil is a sovereign nation, right? How can you tell a sovereign nation to stop burning its own forest? You can't. What they're asking for is control over a sovereign nation by a world governing body who can then send troops, a police force, to make Brazil stop burning the rainforest. And that's why they started the burning of the rainforest in the first place. You see, they went down there and they built a road across the Amazon jungle that went nowhere. There was no reason for this road to be built. There was no place to go. It doesn't go from here to a city on the other side. It just goes across the jungle and ends. And they built this road on purpose because they knew that most of the people in Brazil are so dirt poor that they would see this road as the answer to their prayers. Free land, free timber, a way to support their family, a way to become wealthy, or at least more wealthy than they were, which was no wealthy. And that's exactly what happened. Millions of people headed out down this road and staked out some land and burned the forest and tried to grow crops. And they found that rainforest is no good for growing crops. It'll grow one crop, and then you got to go burn more trees and plant another crop because the soil is poor. And that's what's happening. And that's why the forest is being burned. And it was done intentionally to create the scream of stop burning the rainforest so that then they can offer the solution. The solution is a world governing body that can then order and enforce that order of Brazil to stop burning.
So the green movement worldwide is now just a manipulation.
Yes.
Of now it's been proposed time and again too that big business is behind things like this, and that would represent a capitalist approach. But what you're saying is we're heading toward a socialist approach based on this scenario.
You have to understand the difference between capitalism, socialism, communism, what all of these things really mean. You have to understand what the difference is between right wing and left wing. People, they use these phrases all the time, and they don't even know what these things mean. And it's just incredible to me to hear a socialist calling someone else a Nazi. Because Nazi means National Socialism. So here's a socialist calling a right-wing guy a Nazi. What he should be calling the right-wing guy is anarchist. People on the right want no control. They're really anarchists.
So they would, in theory then, or in fact, be in opposition to this ultimate movement.
Yes.
Whereas in appearance, they would be the ones behind it.
Well, when you have a misunderstanding what the terms mean, yes.
Okay.
Right wing, on the far right, is total anarchy. They don't want anybody controlling anything that they do, and they believe that people are responsible enough that the world can exist without government.
Okay.
Or the very minimal government that it would take to. On the far left, on the other hand, they believe that the government should be in total control and should be a supply man with all of his needs.
Well, creating a whole society that's dependent.
Right. A republic is somewhere in the middle. It's governance by laws. Laws are decided by representatives who are elected by the people. And according to the theory, the representatives will do what is right, whether they get elected or not, because it's not really a democracy. A democracy is far left. People don't understand. We don't live in a democracy. This country is not a democracy. It is a republic. A democracy is ruled by the mob. The mob always votes themselves every kind of benefit that they can vote themselves. And whenever you do that, it means large, tremendously overpowering the government in control.
They vote themselves into dependency.
That's it. They vote themselves into a dictatorship is what they do, where they lose all of the benefits that they pretended to vote themselves into in the first place.
Okay.
And democracies are extremely dangerous to minorities, because if the majority of people don't like you,
right,
they're going to vote that they kill you, and that's it. Democracies are dangerous. Democracies are socialists. Democracies are communism. That's what communism is. The definition of communism is everybody according to their talents and receiving according to their need. And it doesn't work. We already know it doesn't work. Men, by its inherent nature, is greedy. So those at the top always end up having everything, and those at the bottom end up having nothing in communism. Socialism is different. Socialism usually ends up in a dictatorship, in a very controlling dictatorial government which even owns the people that it governs, so that those who live in fear of not having are provided for what they need, and in turn they worship this oppressive government. Socialists are children who went out into the world, took a look around and said, I can't handle it, and went home to daddy.
Okay.
Daddy, protect me. Daddy, feed me. Daddy, loan me your car. Daddy, tuck me in at night. Socialists are scared little children who are irresponsible, can't stand on their own 2 feet, and need daddy to take care of them.
Okay.
Okay?
Now we got the...
But what happens when you go home to daddy and daddy does all these things for you? Tell me.
Well, you never leave the home. You've got no reason to. In other words, if you're being provided for in that way.
You're being provided for, but what does it mean? Doesn't it mean that you have to do what daddy tells you to do?
True.
Doesn't mean you have to be in when daddy tells you to be in. Doesn't mean that you can't drive the car to the next town if daddy tells you you can't. Doesn't it mean that if daddy tells you to take out the trash, you better take out the trash? Are you beginning to understand the concept? When you ask for favors from daddy, you have to give up freedom in return.
Okay.
So socialism always leads to repression of liberty, freedom, equality. All of those things fly out the window so that you can have free health care, so that you can have a place to live, but you don't have to pay the rent, so that you can have food given to you by the state. And that's where we're headed. Right in this country right now, we're almost totally socialist, and now people are screaming for a national health care policy.
Right.
Health care insurance.
Now, the other aspect, once again, I like to go into is the anarchy or the right wing, which we just into that similar.
Anarchists believe that they can be responsible, that they won't hurt other people.
Okay.
That your freedom never ends until it begins to infringe upon someone else's freedom. And that no one should have any control over that. That there should be no speed limits on the highways. The problem is that, again, just like on the socialist side, you have people over here that are human, and human condition means that ultimately somebody's not going to be responsible, that they're going to drive too fast when they've had too much to drink, and they're going to kill innocent people. The answer is a balance. You know, the law of the universe says this. It's a law of physics, really, that everybody can understand it. For every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. There can be no good unless there is evil. There can be no man without a woman. Do you understand the concept?
Based on that, the theory of a utopia here on Earth is corrupt right away.
Absolutely.
It goes against the laws of physics.
It goes against the law of the universe that there must be two opposing forces all the time in every instance, because that's what makes the universe work. That's what makes everything work. What we need to do is stop trying to go way over here, establish some utopia of freedoms, or way over here to establish some repression of freedom so that we make sure that we got something on the table to eat. And strike a balance between the two that works. And stop withholding information. What makes it difficult for anyone to succeed or live, or for us to really come together and have peace in this world, are all of these people who think that they are the guardians of the secrets of the ages, and only them have truly mature minds. So only them are worthy of knowing the secrets of the real science and the real metaphysics and all of these things. So they repress it and they keep it secret, so the rest of us live out our lives and we don't know the truth of what life is really all about. Therefore, we're always stumbling over each other and getting in each other's way and doing the things that we profess that we don't want to do. simply because we don't have access to the truth. If we had access to the truth. Now, I got to tell you this, back when these men first began establishing these societies, these mystery schools, and suppressing information, the common man was uneducated, did not have an intellect capable of understanding these secrets. They were really beasts of burden for the most part, and they lived their whole life in toil.
Right.
But things are not that way now. Most people have a good education. They have a good mind. They're capable of understanding if they're taught, and if they're taught correctly. And I think it's time to teach people what the truth is and quit hiding it so that we can come together as one humanity and make a balance and live together in a balance. You know, evil's never going to disappear. Neither is good. But we can maintain a balance and life can be good. Instead of swinging back in this tremendous battle between these two opposing, radical, extreme ends of the scale. That's got to stop. I've never understood why somebody would join together in this band of people and call himself a Democrat and not vote for anybody else if they're not a Democrat. That concept is beyond my understanding. And Republicans and libertarians and populists and communists and socialists and this and that, and blacks and whites and Indians, and there are so many sects and groups and segments, and we're so fragmented that getting together is going to really be difficult. But we've got to do it. Because if we don't wake up and do it ourselves, these men who meet in secret and plot the manipulations are going to do it whether we want it or not, and they're going to do it at the point of a gun. They're going to take away everybody's freedom because they don't consider us responsible.
Capable of having that freedom.
Are capable, or even of using our intellect. So they'll put us in shackles and control us and force us to be peaceful. That's what the plan is, and that's what the New World Order is all about.
Well, we've run from UFOs right to this, and at first a person might watch this and say, wow, this is really strange, but where we've come down to, based on that beginning, is quite in the realm of common sense.
Well, it's not strange at all. It's what they've been trained all their life, that if they hear these buzzwords, they're listening to some loony idiot talk, and it has no substance to it. Once they get into it, though, and begin to understand that everything is interconnected, it's leading us toward one end, a one-world totalitarian socialist government. And begin to see it coming to pass all around them in their life, and understand that nothing happens by accident. It's been planned for many years. Then they begin to understand that UFOs play a big role in this. Because if they're real, it's the most significant thing that's ever happened in the history of man. And may be the driving force behind locking up the human race. Because how could a UFO land in a place like Macon, Georgia, and somebody who doesn't look like us get out and walk down the street? And I'm not trying to insult the citizens of the state of Georgia. But what if they landed in Newark, New Jersey, and got out and walked down the street? In a society that kills people because they sit in the wrong seat on a bus.
I'd assume now that they'll know about us.
Of course they will. They probably already know about you if you've been exposing the truth on your show.
Would you assume that our phone lines would be bugged at this point?
I don't know. I doubt it. They don't really consider you to be a threat unless you develop a large political following.
Oh, okay.
So, unless you have a large political following, you're not considered to be a threat to them. Because they figure that the people are too stupid to listen to you anyway. And generally, they're right.
So we're in the process of educating people then.
Yeah.
The best thing.
Education is 60 or 70% of the battle.
Yeah.
Because people automatically begin to do the right things once they learn what the truth is.
They're educated.
Hold on. Okay, I got it.
Ready?
Ready. Okay, good.
Let's go back into the Kennedy situation here. Now, the Warren Commission was highly publicized, all the things that went on there. I was shown a videotape just yesterday of was it a Zapruder film?
It is the Zapruder.
Okay, and it clearly showed to me that a number of things. One in which that the film was obviously tampered with.
Absolutely.
But not tampered with to the point where I couldn't tell that the driver of the limousine was pulling a gun, or what appeared to look like a gun, around his shoulder and shooting President Kennedy in the head. That caused his head to snap back. Did the Warren Commission see this? It seems so.
The Warren Commission never looked at the Zapruder film, ever. So they never saw it. Now, I don't know who testified during the Warren Commission about the Zapruder film, if anybody did. But I do know that later at the investigations of the House Committee on Assassinations, that a man was specifically hired as an expert witness to view the Zapruder film and tell the committee what it showed. And that man's name is Robert Groden. He wrote High Treason, which is a bestseller out now on the Kennedy assassination. And he was one of the many so-called technical experts for the making of Oliver Stone's film called JFK. He's also a fake, a fraud, a traitor, a liar. He was hired by the House Select Committee on Assassinations based upon his resume, which says, very simply, that he is the world's foremost #1 photo analyst, which is a lie. He never went to school in photography. He never was a photographer. He never was a photo analyst. And I got to tell you right now that the world's #1 foremost photo analysts are all come out of the military intelligence community, who are trained to interpret high altitude photography and learn what really is there. He never served in that capacity either. He looked at the Zapruder film and he told Congress, he told the committee in testimony, he testified both in written and in verbal form that William Greer never took his hands off the steering wheel. And that's a blatant lie. I mean, anybody can look at the Zapruder film and see that William Greer takes his hands off the steering wheel. And even if you couldn't see it, if they cut out the frames, you could still see that William Greer, if this were the seat of the car, is turned all the way around with his right side against the rear cushion of the front seat, looking directly at President Kennedy in this attitude. And it is a physical impossibility to have both hands on the wheel in that attitude. So we know that Robert Groden, #1, was not who he said he was, had no expertise to be doing the job that he was hired to do. #2, even if he had no expertise, it is plainly visible in the film that William Greer could not possibly have had both hands on the wheel. So we know that Robert Groden didn't make a mistake. We know that he intentionally lied to deceive Congress and thus the American people. And what's real strange about it is he's been very active in the research community, supposedly exposing the assassination of President Kennedy. But if you look what he does, he is constantly coming up with new theories, supposed new evidence, most of which is fake. And in his book now, High Treason, he makes a statement that Kennedy was probably hit from the front and the rear at the same time. His job is to keep the American people confused and propagate the lie that our government is no good, that it's our government who assassinated John F. Kennedy. And I'm here to tell you, it wasn't our government. It was the secret societies known as the Illuminati, the Knights Templar, the Freemasons who assassinated John F. Kennedy. And the proof is right there for anybody who wants to see it. William Greer was a Freemason. #1, he was the Secret Service agent who shot Kennedy. #2, in Dealey Plaza, there's an obelisk, a monument commemorating the location of the first Masonic temple in the state of Texas. Dealey Plaza is on the 33rd parallel, which is one of the sacred numbers in Freemasonry. He was assassinated in a manner that assured the greatest flow of blood, which is called blood atonement, which was practiced by Freemasonry in the early days and supposedly is not practiced now. But in reality is the method of choice of execution, trial and execution by Freemasons. The Bilderberg group that orders his execution is the Supreme World Council of Freemasonry and consists of 39 permanent members, which is 3 times 13, which is also the exact number of men who signed the Constitution. 39. You see, our forefathers were also members of this secret group, and this country was founded to bring about the New World Order. And it's all in the Great Seal of the United States, which was, the design of the Great Seal was made law in 1782. It's just absolutely incredible that the American people don't understand that groups of men don't get together and meet in secret and take blood oaths, which say that they can be cut open and their heart ripped out of their body and their intestines scattered over the floor if they talk about the secrets. That's not a benevolent fraternity. That's a dangerous group of men. Grown men don't play games like that. They're serious. It's the secret societies who are bringing about the New World Order. They're the ones who killed John F. Kennedy. There's nothing wrong with our Constitution or our Bill of Rights. But Americans are going to be convinced that our government sucks. And that's what all this stuff is all about.
So at the beginning, the founders of this country actually did create what was I guess you could say, an above-board good government basis for good government.
Yes. They gave us every tool to ensure the success. But it was an experiment, you see, because man had always claimed that he could rule himself, but had never been allowed to do that. Even in ancient Rome, they call it a democracy, and the man didn't rule himself. He was ruled by other people who made man think he was ruling himself. But the truth was, a Roman centurion could march down the street and grab anybody they wanted to and make you do whatever they wanted to, or just execute you on the spot. And that was the truth of the matter. Those were free people. In the history of the world, there had never been a people who were truly free or who truly ruled themselves until the United States of America was created as a republic by which we rule ourselves through elected representatives whom we sent to the State House, either in the States or to Congress, to do it. They also gave us every tool by which we would destroy ourselves if we weren't capable of doing it. The United States and France, the revolution in this country and the revolution in France, were created to bring about governments which would function as the antithesis to the kings and queens of the world and cause them to topple off their thrones. It also gave man a chance to prove once and for all whether he could rule himself or not. If he could, fine. That would be the New World Order. If he couldn't, they built the tools into the Constitution to allow them to take it away from us. And those tools are the creation of the federal democracy within the boundaries of Washington, D.C., and the right to contract, through which, if we were irresponsible, we would contract to receive rights from that federal democracy and thus, in return, give up our freedom. And that's exactly what's happening. It's exactly what we've done. John F. Kennedy was short-circuiting the New World Order. He had ordered the printing of constitutional money, United States notes, which would have destroyed the Federal Reserve, which is not an agency of the United States government. It's a private corporation owned and operated by the world bankers, controlled by the Illuminati. And its purpose was to destroy the middle class in this country and thus our economy, and throw us at the mercy of the New World Order.
And we see this unfolding now.
You see it unfolding now. You are seeing, and I predicted this well in advance, you are seeing the destruction of the economy of the United States. And it will continue. It will not get better. It's downhill from here on out. Unless we nationalize the Federal Reserve, lock up the criminals who own it, cancel the debt, which will then bankrupt the Illuminati, which is exactly what we ought to do. Print constitutional money, which cannot be usurped, which cannot lead to our destruction, and go back to what we're supposed to do, and quit contracting for benefits. We're escaping from the laws of nature, and there's a terrible consequence for that. Terrible consequence. We have to function within the laws of nature. You can't contract for somebody else to keep you alive. You have to be responsible within your life to keep yourself alive. And if you can't do it, then you have to die. That's the law of nature. You see. Kennedy also did a lot of other things. I mean, he was a believer in the Bible. These men who are bringing about the New World Order don't believe in the God of the Bible. They believe in the God of the light, Lucifer, the angel of light, who was flung down to the earth and became the Lord of the world. That's their God. That's why everything they do goes against what people know to be the right thing to do. They believe that man was held prisoner by a vindictive, cruel God named Jehovah in the Garden of Eden. And that Lucifer, through his agent Satan, set man free from the bonds of ignorance to which he was chained to the Garden of Eden, and thus brought the gift of intellect, wisdom, to man, and thus is the true benevolent God. And man, with his intellect and his wisdom and his knowledge, will create technology which will elevate man to the position of God. And all this is allegorical. Don't take the story literally, you see, because it's all allegorical. They believe that intellect, reason, is the light, is the true God, is what makes man God. And I'm not going to debate the right or wrongness of that, because who the hell knows? But I can tell you that they pervert whatever it is that might be divine about their philosophy by becoming what they profess to destroy.
Yes.
And so, in their zeal to bring about the New World Order, they destroyed the political will of the nation when they assassinated John F. Kennedy, which has furthered their goal, because it made a lot of people feel so helpless that, God, if they can kill the president, who am I? You know, what can I do? I'm just one lonely, helpless person. So they quit voting. They abdicated their power. And, of course, through agents like Robert Groden and many others, Oliver Stone, they're being convinced that our government sucks, that our government is the problem, that the Constitution doesn't work, that the Bill of Rights aren't real.
We're playing right into their hands, in other words.
We're playing right into their hands, because there's nothing wrong with the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or our government. You see, it's been infiltrated. And from within, they are eating at the heart of this nation like a cancer, this secret society. They are destroying it. They are subverting it. Our Constitution has not been allowed to work since 1945, and maybe even earlier. And they have been working behind the scenes to bring about a one-world totalitarian socialist government with the Communist Manifesto as its platform, through the United Nations, which was created by this nation from an older organization called the League of Nations, which was the original foundation. And at the highest levels of our government, the Constitution's already been scrapped, and they are working under the aegis of the UN Participation Act and the United Nations Charter.
Which says what?
Which says that there are no rights, there are only what you call privileges. And privileges can be granted or taken away at will by the state.
Quite frightening scenario.
It's a very frightening scenario, and people better wake up to the fact that unless they wake up and do something about it now, there's only going to be one alternative. And that's either take up arms, restore the Constitution, and the blood will run in the streets of America, or reach down and put the shackles around your own feet and march off into slavery peacefully. Not going to be easy the coming years.
Now, historically, this may or may not relate, but at least modern world, contemporary world history does not include the stories of Atlantis and Lemuria that go predate. How does that history, and why was that suppressed, or why is it still being suppressed? How might that affect what we are understanding is going on today, or is it related?
Well, I'm not sure if a place called Atlantis or Lemuria ever existed or didn't exist. I don't really know. But I do know that the story that is told about the civilizations that lived there are something that we should listen to, because this whole scene may have played itself out before on this earth. And if you understand the theory which I believe has been accepted as fact now, continental drift. There may have been an Atlantis and a Lemuria, which had tremendously developed technologies and societies. And the same scenario that we're playing out now on this great stage called the world may have played itself out over and over again in the past for millennium. In my investigation of the mystery schools, the secret societies that are bringing all this about, that really control everything behind the scenes, I've found that this is all about religion. It's all about a recurring theme that is penetrated and is at the heart of every religion in the world. And that is a creator or a creatress who has a son that is sacrificed and then is resurrected and saves the world or saves humanity. It seems to be an archetype that is within us. And so that you don't go flipping out watching this tape. I'm a Christian. I believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ, even though it may turn out that he may have never lived. The scene, it doesn't matter. When you read his words, and you can go back through history and find these are the same words that were spoken by every Savior that there ever was, are the most beautiful, most profound, most affecting words that have ever been spoken on the face of this earth. And when I get down and almost get to a point of hopelessness, I just go read the Sermon on the Mount. And I come back up again. Because in the end, it's not going to matter whether Jesus ever lived or didn't live. The story is real. And it's within all of us. And it brings us to something within ourselves that's good. But these men don't look at that. They believe that the end justifies the means, that these stories are just stories, and that the real meaning behind it all is that man can transcend his animal state through the realization of intellect and the overcoming of all of his emotions and feelings and morals, guilt, all of these things. And I just can't go along with that because I believe it's our emotions that tell us when we're doing wrong. We feel it within ourselves. And a person without that capacity to feel when they're doing wrong becomes a sociopath, which is someone without a conscience, who really believes that the end justifies the means, and therefore has no pangs of conscience, nor no reluctance to murder someone who gets in their way. And it's extremely dangerous.
And these people recognize the continuity of life. In other words, you have told me earlier that they're after physical immortality.
They believe that through their technology, man will become God. With the power of reason, through technology, man will himself become God. They will engineer, just like Hitler wanted to do, the super race who will live forever. And the concept is the same, and the men behind it are the same as Hitler was. When they killed John F. Kennedy, it shows you what kind of men they are, because they would not stop to kill anyone who gets in their way. And they've never stopped at it. Their goal, literally, to bring about the New World Order will be to kill approximately 2 billion people before the year 2000. AIDS is one method of doing this. There'll be many more. As they solidify their control, everyone will be given a choice. They'll be presented with a new world religion. They'll be told to renounce Christ, renounce Buddha, renounce Muhammad, join the New World Order, join the New World Religion. If they refuse, they'll be executed. Very simple. And it won't bother them a bit. In fact, according to their beliefs, they believe they'll be helping these people. And in reality, they will. Because those people will transcend this physical state while they're prisoned here living forever. I feel sorry for them because those of us who will eventually die will transcend the pain and the suffering that goes along with this world. And they're so egotistical that they preserve whatever they do so that the diligent can find out what kind of men these men really are. For instance, the Kennedys assassination. I've been showing a film for 5 years that shows exactly who did it. I show you exactly where Oswald is on the film. He wasn't even on the 6th floor. He was standing in the doorway of the book depository building watching the motorcade go by. And it's incredible.
At the same time, you said they would have everybody renounce religion. Have they as well been using it as a tool for their means?
If you're a Christian, you'll be required to renounce Christ and join the New World religion. And remember, I told you before, that no matter what your religion is or what you think, they are following the scenario in the book of Revelations to a T, right down to the last little bit. If you want to know what's going to happen in the future, if we don't wake up, and through the power of those, not one drop of blood ever has to be spilled, and no one has to ever put any chains on their legs or their arms, ever. If people just wake up and exercise what was given to us in our Constitution, the power of the vote, while we still have that power.
So you say there is still a possibility for like one individual watching this tape to actually make a difference?
You better believe it.
How would that be so?
Well, number one, learn what the truth really is. Get away from the fantasy that you've been living. Educate other people, those you know, your family. Once that begins to happen, it spreads. And then if the people decide that they don't want what they have in store for us planned, just through the power of the vote, they can make this country and the world whatever they want it to be. Whatever they want it to be. And there are no limits on that, except to understand that you can never make everything all right, and you can never make everything all bad. Both must exist, and we must maintain a balance. And we must become responsible. If each individual on this earth learned to walk in a divine state of grace, responsible for themselves, their family, their city, their state, their country, and for the world.
And to the laws of nature.
And to the laws of nature. And actively participate in solving the problems of yourself, your family, your city, your state, your country, and the world. There could never be a group of men meeting behind closed doors in secret that could ever control anybody. But by abdicating responsibility, by not walking in that divine state of grace, makes possible anyone meeting behind closed doors to bring about the world that they want. And the world that they want may not be the world that you want, or that I want, or that these people watching might want. If you don't participate, you can't complain. If you don't help cook the meal, you got no right to bitch about it. You got to sit down and eat what's put on your plate. If you don't like that, then you should have been in the kitchen helping to prepare the meal, helping to plan it, helping to prepare it, helping to serve it. If you want to sit on your butt in the living room while somebody else prepares the meal for you and decides what it's going to be and puts it on the table, it's too late to say that's not what you wanted to eat. It's too late to say it's not cooked the way you wanted it to cook.
Well, that's very simple to understand. And
that's right. You got to eat it because you have to eat to live. And I think that anybody can understand the meaning behind that little story.
Okay, let's take a step back to the Kennedy thing now.
This is all about the Kennedy.
Well, yeah, it is. But just specifically about, once again, I want to bring up the film as well. Another thing that came to my mind when I viewed it is that the two Secret Servicemen, the driver and the person sitting next to him in the front, regardless of what they claim happened, obviously did not operate in a way that you were trained as a Secret Serviceman to protect the president. Shouldn't they have just driven that car right out of there, and the other guy should have done something to protect or look for who's shooting? You know, it just didn't seem to make any sense. Well, how would the Warren Commission not? They didn't see the film, so I guess
they didn't see the film by design, because if they saw the film, they'd have to be responsible for the decision that they made that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin.
Okay.
So I think they didn't see the film on purpose because they didn't want to have to be responsible for saying, hey, look, the driver did it, you know. They didn't want to make that decision. And in a letter that Lyndon Johnson wrote to the Warren Commission, he specifically said in the letter, you must quickly identify Lee Harvey Oswald as acting alone with no no conspiracy, so that America can get back to business.
Was Lyndon Johnson acting on behalf of this secret society, or was he concerned?
Of course, he had to know all about it and approve of it because he was going to be the new president. And the new president would be in charge of the investigation.
How high up a government official do you have to be before you're briefed of this, the total of all the things that are going on, the reality behind them?
Well, you have to understand that nobody exists on a high level in government who's opposed to the New World Order. Nobody. Our government has literally been infiltrated. And there's a cancer within our government destroying it, eating it, nibbling away at it, hacking off its limbs.
And you said this started in 1945?
1945 was when the overt destruction began to occur, when Truman signed the UN Participation Act and the United Nations Treaty. It actually began long before that, when these secret societies began to infiltrate the government and appoint their members to important posts. Infiltration is easy. If one gets in, he can then appoint and hire others to replace people who are not members below him.
So now we've had over almost 50 years of this going on.
At least, I believe that it started back probably 1913, 1917, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, when the Council on Foreign Relations became a reality in this country. And you can, by diligent research and study, you can see when it happened, where it happened, who did it, and how it was done. It's apparent. When they say there's no conspiracy, we talk about a conspiracy. It started out as a conspiracy. But when they say today there's no conspiracy, that's not a lie, it's the truth. They were doing it right out in the open, right under our noses, and we're too stupid to know it, to see it. So it's not a conspiracy now today at all. It's right out in the open. They even published their plans. I mean, here Carter appointed Zbigniew Brzezinski as the National Security Advisor, who just wrote a book before he was appointed, declaring himself a Marxist. When you read that book, this man believes in Marxism. This man is a socialist. Not only a socialist, he's an international socialist. He's a globalist. His goal, stated in his book, to destroy the sovereignty of nations and bring about a one-world Marxist government.
Now, the Carter administration was one extreme, and then we came into the Reagan administration, yet
nothing changed.
Nothing changed. What you're saying is that no matter what the political leanings, they seem to be playing the same game.
As long as you're playing their game, it doesn't matter who you vote for, who you put in office. They all belong to the other side, to the pockets of the Illuminati. When you quit electing professional politicians, when you quit electing the guy who looks nice on television because he speaks good and he looks like the guy you wanted to marry or something like that, you're playing right into their hands. They've made it so impossible for another Abraham Lincoln to get elected to the office of president that it's a wonder that we even have a chance at all. We need to send people to Congress and to government who are going to clean house. Kick all the members of secret societies out of the bureaucracy. Lock them up. Try them for treason. But they are traitors.
So one thing that may help is term limitations.
We must have term limitations, and it must be only one term. And forget all this nonsense that anybody goes to Washington and don't know what's happening. They don't know what's happening simply because they haven't taken the time as citizens to understand how our government works before they ever go to Washington. You see, it should be a process that starts in infancy and works its way up, and everybody should be taking part in the government.
Now, if someone came in to office with this kind of knowledge and with this kind of intent to really push these people out, would they not be eliminated immediately?
Not if they have the people behind them, because what the people would do in one fell swoop, in one election, would elect people who've never served in government before, kick the incumbents out, send citizens to Washington. And here's the way it has to be done. Right now, you don't even pay your congressman. You know who pays your congressman? The federal democracy of the District of Columbia. The federal government pays your congressman, who's supposed to be representing your state and you. The federal government is a foreign country to your state. Why should he represent you? Not only that, but he moves to Washington, D.C. He maintains a residence here, but he doesn't live here. And as long as you reelect him, he continues to live in Washington, D.C. forever if you keep reelecting him. So they lose all touch with what's back here. They're paid by a foreign government, the federal government. They're not paid by the sovereign state of Georgia or by you. They have to be paid by you. And they have to live here. They can't move to Washington, D.C. They go to Washington, D.C. for one term. Okay? One term only. When that term's up, they have to come back. And you don't pay them exorbitant funds. You pay them just enough to live on comfortably while they're there. No fancy giant cocktail parties, none of this crap. And you take care of their family. See, they don't take their family either. That's the other clue. They leave their family here where they live. You, the people of Georgia, take care of their family and their business or their farm or whatever it is they have while they're gone. Now, do you think they have a vested interest in representing you? They sure would under those conditions. But under the conditions they go under now, they have no interest whatsoever in taking care of you.
Now let's look at the current.
They're taking care of themselves.
The current crop of presidential candidates. Is there anybody even running that represents something that we're talking about here?
No, all of them are New World people. Songus, in his book, even everything he's written touts the New World Order. All of it, right for Songus's literature. You're going to see New World Order, New World Order, New World Order, New World Order. Clinton, the governor of Georgia, was selected in 1991 by the Bilderberg, governor of Arkansas, was selected in 1991 by the Bilderberg group in Baden-Baden, Germany, to be the new president of the United States. Remember what happened to Gary Hart? What did he do? He went out on a boat with a woman who wasn't his wife, and he was destroyed. Look at Clinton. What's happened to him? Nothing. The press is on his side. They're helping the guy. You know why? Because he was chosen by the people who own the press to be the next president of the United States. Now, I don't know if he will be or not. That's up to the American people. But if they get their way, he will be. Bush is one of the most heinous criminals that's ever walked on the face of the earth. Bush is the man who's been a CIA agent since his college days. He's a member of the Skull and Bones, the Russell Trust. He was initiated in a casket with a ribbon tied around his genitalia, which symbolizes that he's a priest in the temple of Isis. A pagan, this guy. This man is a member of the mystery schools.
Well, he has the outward appearance of a good Christian, church-going Christian, though.
They do whatever they have to be moved by the people, but in secret, they're not at all. This is a man who practices pagan religious rituals, magic. Doesn't matter what you think of all these things. I'm just telling you, this is what he does in secret. He is the man who, when he was chief executive officer, when he was president of the offshore division of Oil, organized and began the first large-scale drug smuggling operations into this country. George Bush is the one responsible for the drugs on the streets. And the war against drugs is not a war against drugs, it's a war against the Bill of Rights. We've already lost the Fourth Amendment in this war.
That's true.
And we're going to lose everything else. You watch on, it amazes me. People watch on Saturday night, cops, top cops, tough cops, 911. All of these stories that are glorifying the police state, and they're falling right into the manipulation as they watch police with no search warrant, with no court order, break down people's doors, tear out their walls, rip open their mattresses. All in the name of the war on drugs.
Pretty sneaky.
It's pretty sneaky, all right. You see them stop people in the streets, and the guy's got $400 in his pocket. They don't press any charges. They didn't even have any reasonable suspicion to stop the person and search him. And what do? They take their money, and they don't give it back. And America's watching this. And the stupid idiots, yes, you stupid idiots, you sit there and watch it, not realizing that when you take away that man's freedom, you've also taken away your own. You see, because they can do the same thing to you. Just because you talk a way that they don't like you talking, or because you wear red shoes and they don't like red shoes, they can do the same thing to you. And under the new law, without a court order, without a search warrant. They can break down your door. They can rip open your mattresses, your couches, your walls. They can trash your house. All in the name of the war on drugs. And let's say they don't like the color of your shoes. All they have to do is drop a little pouch of cocaine in your living room, behind your couch, and find it and say, aha, you're a drug dealer. What happens then? Now they can confiscate your house, all your possessions, all your property, all your bank accounts, all your cars, boats, vacation cottages, whatever you have. And they can auction it off within 24 hours without ever even pressing charges against you. Without a court order, without due process, without just compensation. And there's not a damn thing that you can do about it. Not a damn thing.
At least right now.
At least right now. And the reason you can't do a damn thing about it is because you're the one who brought it about through your stupidity. You're mentally crippled. You're operating from a position of ignorance, apathy, abdication, irresponsibility. We're losing our country, our freedoms, everything.
Now, these are strong accusations of the American public. What do you hope to accomplish by angering the very audience that you want to watch and listen to you?
Go prove me wrong. Go make me the idiot. In so doing, you're going to find out what the truth is, and maybe you'll wake your up. And if you did, maybe we can save our country. Because I don't really care at this point whether you get mad at me or not. My country's disappearing. My freedoms are disappearing. My daughter's going to live as a slave in the New World Order if you people don't wake up and help me. So, if I had a 2x4, literally, I would smack you upside the head with it. I don't care if you get mad at me. It's beyond that state. You know, I'm willing to put my life on the line. Why would I care if you get mad at me? You know, people say, well, don't you feel threatened? Don't you feel like your life is in danger? Are you kidding? You're the people who sent your sons and daughters to fight an illegal, immoral, unjustified war in the Middle East. And that didn't bother you a bit that they might have got killed over there, and you're worried that I might get hurt or killed? Right here, really defending my country. Really fighting in the defense of the Constitution.
Right. You brought up the Persian Gulf War. That's something that's still on a lot of people's minds. Based on what you're saying, what's the reason for that war?
They should feel really guilty. They should feel really bad about that.
I mean, what about a Saddam Hussein that everyone seems to agree is you know, the evil man here, that we had the right to go in and punish, destroy, or whatever?
Well, it's funny that the man who purported to want to destroy Saddam Hussein was the man who really built Saddam Hussein when he was in the Central Intelligence Agency. We have been building up Saddam Hussein's arsenal. His technology comes from us in the Soviet Union. We built him up to create that war. We did it for a purpose, and the purpose was, look at this, if George Bush knew what he was doing, how come he didn't know what he was doing? Here's what he said. We've got to send troops to the Middle East because we can't afford to pay $26 a barrel for oil. That's on tape. Next he comes out and he says, no, it's not about the price of oil. It's because Saddam Hussein's not going to stop in Kuwait. He's going to go into Saudi Arabia, and those are our friends, our buddies. So we got to go defend Saudi Arabia. And then James Baker says in a press conference, no, it's not about Saudi Arabia. It's not about $26 a barrel for oil. It's about jobs. Folks, we're going to get you a job. And to do it, we're willing to kill your sons and daughters. Yes, sir. We'll send them off to get killed so that you can have a job. Prosperity. That's what it's all about.
Well, what was the actual scenario if we hadn't have gone in?
Well, see, that's not the end of it yet. Then George Bush comes out and says, whoa, the White House is flooded for telegrams. They don't want their sons and daughters to get killed for a job. It's not about jobs. It's about naked aggression. Yes, sir, there's a little Hitler over there called Saddam Hussein. And we're going to go destroy him because the world doesn't need another Hitler. Never mind Pinochet in Chile, who's another Hitler. Never mind all the other Hitlers in the world.
Well, was that
Never mind Tiananmen Square.
Well, then, you know, then people would say, well, the American government's not interested in that because money is not in you know, it's the oil here. We're talking about money. So
No.
you're saying it's not even that.
No. They They've been planning this war for years. In fact, Arco Press wrote a book about it. The name of the book is Rapid Deployment Forces. It was published in 1985. It names Kuwait as the country. It talks about Operation Bright Star, where they've been practicing war every year since the early 80s. Sending troops over there practicing the war, liberating Kuwait. It's even named in the book. The whole thing was spelled out years ago. What it was all about was to establish the New World Order. You see, because for the first time in the history of the world, it's established the legal international precedent that the United Nations could pass a resolution and send its police force to enforce that resolution, and that the member nations would have to pay for that action. And George Bush said it very clearly, but nobody was listening when he said, no longer will any nation stand against a world by other countries were established as the one world police force of the United Nations. Have you seen the new Air Force uniforms yet? Nowhere on them does it say United States or U.S. They are United Nations uniforms. Go look at them.
What role in the Middle East again does Israel play in this?
Israel was created as the instrument to bring about the Battle of Armageddon and the fulfillment of prophecy, a war that will be so terrible, where nuclear weapons will be used, so that the American citizens and the other people in the world will get down on their knees and beg for no more war. And what is the answer to that? They're going to be told the only way we can guarantee no more war is if we destroy the sovereignty of nations and we come together as one humanity in a one world government.
Right.
And I'm telling you, unless the American people wake up and stop it, starting in about 1996, the Battle of Armageddon will become a reality. Not because two nations got mad at each other and decided to fight, and that's why Saddam Hussein was not destroyed. He will be the instrument that will bring that to pass.
Right. Yeah, they purposely did not go in and do that.
Saddam Hussein will be portrayed as the Antichrist. Babylon is in Iraq. Read the book of Revelations, whether you believe in the book or not. Read it, because the men who are bringing this about are using it as their script.
Well, the UN did indeed charter Israel as a sovereign nation. They were the ones who created this state.
That is correct. It was really created by Great Britain and the United States, with the United States being the major instigant.
Okay, and the Jewish people were then being manipulated into believing it was for some other reason.
That's correct. They've always been manipulated. And I get people who still come to me all the time and say, Bill, you're all wrong. It's the Jews. The Jews are subverting the world. Man, it's not the Jews. It's not the Catholics. It's not the blacks. It's these men who belong to the ancient mystery schools who meet in secret and decide the fate of the world. And they belong to all different races and all different nationalities and all different religions to the public point of view. But in secret, it's a different story.
How about the European community? Here seems, based on your theory, another group of sovereign nations coming together to form one government.
The European community, the EEC, was created by the Central Intelligence Agency, working through a lodge in Italy called the P2 Lodge. Propaganda 2 is the name of it, which is the intelligence arm of the Vatican. And Prince Bernard, who is the leader of the secret World Council that controls these secret societies around the world, called the Bilderberg Group. And that's the truth of the matter.
Well, during its creation, they just threw out Margaret Thatcher. She was really opposing this.
Yes, she was, and that's why she got ousted.
Okay.
So did the Shah of Iran. So did Marcos. Anyone who opposes it gets ousted. That wasn't an overthrow of Marcos by the people in the Philippines. It was organized, instigated, and carried out by agents of the Central Intelligence Agency and the KGB. The overthrow of the Shah of Iran, our intelligence community is trying to tell us they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know what was happening. Bullshit. They organized it. They instigated it. They are the ones who caused it to come to pass. You see, because we didn't have a National Security Agency or a Central Intelligence Agency before the UN Participation Act was signed. And these organizations were created to bring about the one world government, the New World Order. And it had to be done in a manner that the people would not know that it was being done. And the only way they could do that was hide it behind the veil of national security. And the Cold War was a manipulation maintained to lead the people of tax dollars to fund the creation of the police force of the New World Order, which is the Army, Navy, and Air Force and Marines of the United States and the Soviet Union. And the people didn't rise up in the Soviet Union and overthrow communism. It came from the top down because it had to be done. There has to be a bringing to the same level of all the peoples of the world with approximately the same political viewpoints, so there's not a big disparity in order to be able to justify the merger of all these countries together.
Well, who now is ruling the forces of the former Soviet Union? You have Yeltsin in now. Gorbachev supposedly went down, but we're not sure about that.
Well, let me tell you this. From the beginning, there was never any war between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was created by those at the top to fund the New World Order and the New World Order's police force. At the highest levels of all countries, they all belong to the same club. And we, the people, sit back and we watch this grand drama, which is being played out for our benefit, not theirs. If it wasn't for us, they wouldn't even have to do any of this. But you see, they just can't come out and destroy all of us because they need slaves. They need people to make their shoes and make their cars and mine the ore. They need worker bees, and that's what we are. In the New World Order, we would be the worker bees, the slaves.
So the Orwellian view of the vision of the future wasn't too far off based on this scenario.
George Orwell was just like me. He was a low-level member of British intelligence who was appointed to a position high enough where he saw the same documents that I saw. And he tried to warn the world just like I'm trying to warn the world. Well, he wasn't willing to take the risk that I'm willing to take. So he wrote it in a book called 1984 that spelled out exactly what's coming as a warning to the people of the world, as a work of fiction. But you notice that that work of fiction really stirred people up because they knew that it wasn't fiction. In their heart of hearts, everyone who's read that book knows that it's coming.
But it's a possibility.
Most people won't recognize it overtly or publicly, because then, if they recognize it, they have to be responsible to do something about it. And that's what every one of you have been resisting all your life, is being responsible to do something about it, to get involved. That's why you walk away from a girl being raped on the street by a gang of thugs rather than go and try to help her. And I'm not talking to all of you. I know there's some of you out there just like me, but most of you are just exactly what I've just described. Most people are no better than animals who do not have intelligence because they don't use their intelligence. And to these men who control things behind the scenes, you are stakes on the table by choice and consent, and will always be ruled and manipulated and enslaved by people who do use their brains.
As long as we're debunking some myths, because it's putting pieces of this puzzle together, I think, for a lot of people that may be watching. The hostage situation in Iran that got Carter out of office, is this another orchestration? And if so, how does it fit into the...
October surprise is no myth. There was a deal made. There was a deal made at the highest levels to keep the hostages until after Reagan was elected. Do you really believe that it was an accident, that it was a coincidence, that 30 minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in, took his oath of office, Yes, the hostages were released.
Did they want
Are you
Carter
really
out?
that naive? I can't believe it.
Did they want Carter out?
Yes, they wanted Carter out. They wanted Carter out.
He wouldn't play by the rules?
I don't know why they wanted him out, but they wanted him out. Carter was ineffective. Did not have the support of all the American people. They need people who can manipulate the American people so that they have their support. My message is to you is don't support anybody unless they're doing what we know to be right. Don't believe them. Don't fall for the manipulations. Double check everything they say.
And that means you can't rely on the media as it is today either.
Oh, of course not. All the media in this country, radio, television, and print, is all owned by 5 corporations. All of these corporations that own the media are owned and controlled, and members of the Council on Foreign Relations sit on their board of directors.
Can you name those 5 corporations? Is that...
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
I could try, but I don't want to take the chance on being inaccurate. But you can trace that yourself.
Okay.
But remember, if you go down and you trace the ownership of a station or a newspaper, and you get to a corporation, remember that somebody owns that corporation, and it's usually another corporation. But when you trace the interlocking of all these things, when you get to the top, there's 5. And all journalists know that there's some things you don't write about and you don't talk about because you'll lose your job. And that's where the control is. And that's why they pay anchormen like Dan Rather $2 million a year, because he doesn't question them. He knows that if he goes against them, he's going to lose $2 million a year. Do you think a man that looks pretty and sits in front of a TV camera for the 6 o'clock news is worth $2 million a year? No way. I don't care how long he works, and I don't care what he does. There is no job worth $2 million a year. That's why they pay athletes these fantastic salaries. I was listening to the radio the other day. They just contracted to pay one player on one team $6 million a year. Can you believe this?
And why is that?
It's the Roman circus. What does the emperor do when the people become restive, and when the people are asking questions, and when the people don't like the policies of the emperor? He sends them to the circus. He creates a circus. He builds a giant coliseum, and he begins to throw the Christians to the lions. And he has great chariot races and football games and basketball games, all to keep the idiots preoccupied with things that don't mean anything in the scheme of the entire world, so that they don't have the time to learn what the truth is, so they don't ever get smart enough to learn how they're being manipulated, so they don't ever question the emperor. That's why they pay a player on a football team or a baseball team $1 million or $2 million or $3 million a year. It is the Roman circus. I know men who don't know anything in the world except who plays third base for the Mets, and they think that's a great accomplishment. And they meet and pat each other on the back and bond and go have cocktails and talk about what this guy that plays third base for the Mets did in last night's game. It's sad. It's really sad.
Is there any room in a kind of society where these manipulations are not taking place for this type of entertainment or any type of entertainment at all?
If people understand that a game is a game, if people understand that nobody, no matter what they do, is worth paying $2 or $3 million a year for. People should be able to get rich if they want to, by the sweat of their individual labor. Okay? By going out and doing something for the world. Not by taking people's minds away from the emperor. It's a game. Football's a game. Football's a game. But let me tell you something. When 150 of the most powerful men and women in the world can meet in secret in Baden-Baden, Germany, and plot the fate of billions, and nobody even cares about it. But 6 football players go to lunch together, and it's in the headlines across the country. You have a reflection of the society in which that exists. And it is a sick society that is doomed to to self-destruction.
So based on that scenario, there's some truth into what these men are looking at.
Absolutely, and that's what makes me so sick, is that I'm trying to wake up a people who on a daily basis are proving the ones that I'm warning them about to be right.
Well, so that even though a minority, there are people out there that you recognize are awake to this, if they don't do something about it, they will lose that ability to be free in that way.
That's correct.
Whether they might think, well, I don't need to worry about it because I know what I know and I'm fine. It doesn't work that way. There's a connection here to everything.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. A nation of people who are willing to send their sons and daughters that they profess that they love to a foreign country to die, and they use the excuse to themselves that they're sending them off to defend our country, and they know damn well that's a lie, are doomed.
It's funny, there's a parable, you said Ben Franklin earlier was even a part of this.
Yes.
A parable of Ben Franklin, I don't know if you're familiar with it. He paid too much for the whistle. He came up when he was a young boy. Are you familiar with that parable?
No, go ahead.
When he was a young boy, he was given an allowance. And, it was a decent amount of allowance. And he was going to the store to get a toy. He was very excited about that. And along the way, he met some boys who had this whistle, and he saw that, and he saw the little boys blowing this whistle, and he thought, wow, the greatest whistle. This is the greatest toy. He really wanted this thing. So without asking, he gave all his money away, to these boys for this whistle. And he went home, and sure enough, he got very bored with it, and he had no more money to buy something that was really, worthwhile to it.
Sure.
And so from that point on, he had a saying that said, don't pay too much for the whistle. And I think somehow that relates here.
He's also the one, when the Constitutional Convention was finished, when they wrote the Constitution and signed it, when it had been signed, he walked out the doors. Someone outside, I forget who it was, I believe it was a reporter for one of the newspapers in the 13 colonies, asked him, he said, what have you wrought, Ben? Ben looked at him and he said, a republic, if you can keep it. That's a good place to end.
Yeah, I think so.
That's a great ending.
Wow.
Good job, guys.
All right, Bill.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Bill.
Good job.
The lights are roasting.
Man.
I've already had my son ready for that.
The major media is great at putting out the propaganda because this meme out there, this idea put out by the mainstream media that we have the people have no choice, because after all, you just can't let them fail. The government has to bail them out because it would be much worse to just let them fail. And this is remarkable because the major mainstream media have gotten the American public to buy into policies that guarantee their impoverishment, and it's just a testament to the triumph of mainstream media to push out any dissenting voice or any debate or any kind of public service that you would think would be inherently obligatory for a public airwave to adhere to. They've been, the public airwaves, which started out as a public utility more or less, have been, of course, co-opted by the corporate agenda, and now serve purely at the behest of the propaganda meisters in Washington and in the banking system, who put out these ridiculous, these ludicrous ideas that, we just can't let them fail. And anybody who now has seen their monthly income drop by 90% due to the drop in short-term interest rates by the banking system, the people who are now starving because their monthly income has been slashed by 80 or 90%, These people have had their monthly income slashed for no reason other than to bail out these bankers. So when you say that, well, we couldn't let them fail, you have to understand that simultaneously, you have to understand that you, the individual, has had your monthly income slashed, is where the money is coming from. You are subsidizing the Merrill Lynch bonuses and the Wall Street bonuses, and not only have you had your money stolen, but then you turn around and defend the crooks. And this has got to be the very nature of this whole idea of the Stockholm Syndrome, where the person who's been kidnapped falls in love with their captor. The American people have been kidnapped by the banking system, and now they're defending the banking system while the banking system steals their money in the form of driving interest rates low to bail out banks who have kept afloat this enormous slush fund scheme, unnumbered accounts that are simply there to launder money, launder losses.
A scientist pulled a pinch of dust off a 2,000-year-old piece of leather, ran it through a DNA sequencer, and got back a result that should have been physically impossible. The animal whose skin became that scrap of parchment could not have lived anywhere near the cave where the parchment was found. Not for a day, not for a season, not ever. And that single, impossible result quietly dismantled 70 years of settled scholarship on the most famous ancient manuscripts on Earth. This is the story of how the Dead Sea Scrolls got DNA tested, and why the results actually rewrote what we thought we knew about where the Bible itself came from. Stick around, because by the end of this, you will understand exactly how one cow, yes, one single cow, blew apart a theory that scholars had trusted for 3 generations. To understand why that one result mattered so much, we have to go back to where this whole story began, on a hillside above the Dead Sea, with a shepherd who had absolutely no idea he was about to change history. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd named Mohammed Ed Deeb was out chasing a missing goat when he tossed a stone into a dark cave near the shore of the Dead Sea, just to see if the animal might come bolting out. Instead, he heard something shatter. Curious, he climbed inside and found ancient clay jars, sealed for centuries, holding leather scrolls wrapped carefully in linen. He had no idea what he had actually found. Neither did anyone else, not yet. What he stumbled onto would become one of the single most important archaeological discoveries of the entire 20th century. The oldest biblical manuscripts known to exist anywhere on Earth, some reaching back more than 2,000 years. Between 1947 and 1956, roughly 25,000 fragments, representing close to 1,000 separate manuscripts, were carefully pulled out of 11 different caves near the ruins of a site called Qumran. Together, they hold the earliest known copies of Genesis, Isaiah, and Psalms, sitting right alongside sectarian rulebooks, hymns, and vivid apocalyptic visions, spanning a period from roughly 250 BCE to 68 CE, one of the most turbulent stretches in the entire history of ancient Judaism and the earliest Christian movement. These scrolls had quietly outlived the fall of the Second Temple. They had outlived the entire Roman Empire and every other empire that rose and eventually crumbled across 2,000 years above them in the desert sand. But when scholars finally sat down and opened them, the texts did not hand over easy answers. They handed over questions that would take 7 decades just to begin properly answering. Where had these scrolls actually come from? Who physically wrote them? And why were they hidden away in this one remote corner of the desert? For most of those 70 years, scholars felt genuinely confident they had this figured out. They were wrong. Researchers from institutions all over the world spent decades poring over every visible detail these fragments could offer, working with nothing but trained eyes, scholarly instinct, and painstaking comparison. They compared handwriting, stroke by stroke, studied the color, texture, and thickness of the parchment itself, and cross-referenced language, theology, calendar systems, and literary structure, hunting for any hidden pattern that might connect one fragment to another. The theory that eventually took hold pointed toward the Essenes, a Jewish sect described by ancient historians like Josephus and Pliny the Elder as a secluded monastic community living out in the Judean wilderness, devoted to ritual purity, careful scripture copying, and anticipation of a coming divine judgment on a corrupted world. The ruins, sitting right beside the caves at Qumran, looked remarkably like the kind of settlement those ancient historians had described centuries earlier. The pieces seemed to click together almost too neatly. Sectarian texts described a tightly self-contained religious community with its own leadership, its own internal laws, and a distinctive solar calendar that broke sharply from the lunar calendar kept by the priests running the temple in Jerusalem, a direct theological challenge to that religious establishment. The apocalyptic writings burned with open hostility toward that same temple establishment, and the War Scroll, describing a final cosmic showdown between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, read exactly like the kind of text a breakaway religious sect would produce to make sense of its own painful exile from mainstream Jewish life. The conclusion felt airtight. The Essenes had lived at Qumran, copied their scripture there, and when Rome finally crushed the Jewish revolt in 68 CE, they buried their entire library out in the surrounding caves for safekeeping. For decades, that remained the accepted story, taught confidently in seminaries, featured prominently in museum exhibitions, and repeated in documentary after documentary. The Dead Sea Scrolls were the Essenes' own private collection, case closed. Seemingly nothing left to debate. But underneath that tidy surface, uncomfortable little details kept quietly surfacing over the decades. Details the scholarly tools of the time simply were not equipped to properly resolve. The scrolls displayed wild, genuinely confusing textual variation. Different versions of the exact same biblical books sat side by side in the same collection. Different handwriting styles, different scribal hands, wildly different levels of skill. Parchment quality ranged from expertly prepared, high-quality skins to rough, almost amateurish material, sitting right next to it in the very same cave. When radiocarbon dating was finally applied to a sample of these fragments back in the early 1990s, some scrolls turned out to actually predate the Qumran settlement itself, meaning the timeline simply did not line up the way the Essene theory required it to. And nobody could satisfyingly explain the deeper puzzle sitting underneath all of it. Why would one isolated, tightly disciplined religious sect bother holding on to multiple contradictory versions of its own sacred texts? Why keep two entirely different editions of the Book of Jeremiah, one substantially longer than the other, with whole passages missing and entire chapters rearranged, inside a community supposedly built around rigid religious uniformity? A handful of scholars floated alternative explanations at the margins of the field over the years. Maybe Qumran was not really a monastery at all, but a pottery workshop, or winter estate, or perhaps a military outpost. Maybe the caves had simply functioned as a sacred storage site where worn-out texts from many different communities were respectfully brought to be retired rather than casually discarded. These alternative ideas existed on the fringes of the debate, but none of them carried the kind of hard, undeniable evidence needed to actually knock down a paradigm that had comfortably held for multiple generations of scholars. Then something arrived from a direction absolutely nobody in the field had been expecting. Not an archaeologist, not a theologian, a geneticist in an ordinary conversation with a colleague. Back in 2012 at Tel Aviv University, molecular biologist Oded Richavi found himself talking with biblical scholar Noam Mizrahi, the two of them having recently connected through a new faculty orientation program at the university. The conversation drifted, the way conversations between curious academics often do, toward the Dead Sea Scrolls, toward the maddening ongoing difficulty of matching thousands of tiny disconnected fragments back together, and toward the exact questions that 70 years of careful, dedicated scholarship had never quite managed to fully close. Mizrahi laid the core problem out plainly. 25,000 fragments, no titles, no page numbers, no genuinely reliable way to connect one piece of parchment to another beyond subjective handwriting comparison and educated guesswork about how old a given piece of skin happened to look. Methods that were by their nature subjective, imprecise, and fully capable of being catastrophically wrong without anyone even realizing it at the time. Richavi listened carefully and then asked one simple, almost obvious question. What are the scrolls actually made of? Parchment, Mizrahi told him. Animal skin. Richavi paused for a long moment. Parchment has DNA. That single realization opened up an entirely new field of inquiry that nobody had seriously thought to pursue before. Richavi specialized in ancient DNA analysis, a method that had already reshaped how scientists study human prehistory, tracing migration patterns and population history back across tens of thousands of years using nothing but genetic sequencing technology. In that exact moment, he realized nobody had ever actually pointed the same powerful technology directly at a manuscript, at scripture itself. Together with Pina Shore, the curator responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls collection at the Israel Antiquities Authority, and later joined by additional collaborators, including a geneticist Matthias Jakobsen at Uppsala University in Sweden, Richavi and Mizrahi assembled a small interdisciplinary team that would go on to spend the next several years chasing something nobody before them had ever seriously attempted. What they eventually found along the way would genuinely unsettle even the scholars who had spent their entire careers carefully protecting these fragile, irreplaceable texts. Here was the first serious obstacle the team faced, and it was a genuinely difficult one. The Dead Sea Scrolls are considered sacred by multiple faiths, and by definition, they are entirely irreplaceable historical artifacts. Any method involving cutting, drilling, or physically removing samples from the actual parchment was completely off the table from the very start. The scrolls had to remain whole and essentially untouched throughout the entire process. So how exactly do you read the genetic history of something you're absolutely forbidden to touch? The answer, it turned out, had been sitting there quietly the entire time, hiding in plain sight inside the scroll's own storage boxes. Decades of careful handling had left behind fine particles of parchment dust, slowly accumulating at the bottom of those storage containers over the years. That dust held collagen, the structural protein found throughout animal skin, and locked safely inside it, preserved across 2,000 years, sat genuine ancient genetic material. By carefully gathering dust specifically from blank margins and worn edges, places where no ink or writing had ever actually existed, the team could collect enough usable genetic material without ever once touching the inked text itself. The evidence had been quietly waiting inside that dust the entire time, through every previous study and every single decade of scholarly debate that came before it. But actually turning that collected dust into usable, trustworthy genetic sequences turned out to be brutal, painstaking work. This is where modern lab technology had to step in and do the heavy lifting. The very process of making parchment in the first place, soaking the hide, scraping it, stretching it, treating it, and drying it, damages DNA at a molecular level as it happens. Iron-based inks used on many of these scrolls are chemically corrosive to organic material. And after all of that initial damage, the scrolls then spent nearly 2,000 years sitting inside desert caves before finally being handled by hundreds of different researchers over the following 70 years, each one potentially leaving behind traces of modern contamination. The team ended up working inside dedicated ancient DNA facilities that genuinely resembled sterile clean rooms more than traditional archives. Full protective suits, carefully controlled air pressure, and ultraviolet sterilization equipment running constantly to kill off any stray modern DNA floating in the air. They built strict authentication protocols specifically designed to confirm their results were genuinely ancient rather than simply modern contamination, running every sample through multiple independent extractions and carefully cross-checking every result between entirely separate laboratories using next-generation DNA sequencing machines, the same core technology used in modern genetics labs around the world. It took years of dedicated effort, hundreds of individual samples, and plenty of repeated failure, but eventually the team assembled reliable genetic sequences pulled from dozens of separate fragments. And when Rachavi finally sat down and studied what those sequences actually showed him, he reportedly reached straight for his phone. Most of the fragments matched everyone's existing expectations without any real surprise. Sheepskin, the standard material used throughout ancient Judea at the time, taken from an animal fully capable of surviving comfortably in a genuinely harsh desert environment like the one surrounding Qumran. But a handful of fragments came back reading as something else entirely, something that on the surface should not have been possible at all: cowhide. Noam Mizrahi reportedly stared at that particular result for a long time, because cow parchment turning up at Qumran was not simply some minor anomaly that could be footnoted and quietly set aside. It was physically and geographically almost impossible. Qumran sits deep in the Judean desert, right beside the Dead Sea, one of the harshest, driest environments found anywhere on the entire planet. Sheep and goats can genuinely survive out there, built for arid land, minimal water, and tough scrub vegetation that would rapidly starve almost any other kind of livestock. Cattle simply cannot survive under those same conditions, needing dozens of gallons of water every single day, along with substantial grazing pasture just to survive at all. There was no realistic version of a community living permanently at Qumran that could have also been raising cattle anywhere nearby. Cow parchment simply could not have been produced locally in that specific desert environment. Full stop. Which meant that any scroll actually written on cowhide had to have originated somewhere else entirely, somewhere with genuine water access and real grassland. The long-standing theory was not merely slightly off, it was wrong in a way that one single cow had just made completely undeniable. When that particular result eventually crossed Penina Shore's desk at the Israel Antiquities Authority, she reportedly stopped reading and simply sat with it for a while, having spent her entire professional career serving as custodian of these exact fragments. And the cowhide result was not scattered randomly and evenly across the wider collection either, which would have already been strange enough on its own. It clustered tightly around specific texts, specific versions of specific books, which is exactly where the underlying genetics started getting even stranger. Here is what this small research team could now actually do that nobody before them had ever managed. By carefully comparing genetic markers across different parchment samples, using the same kind of DNA matching technology used in modern forensic labs, they could determine with real confidence whether two separate fragments had actually come from the very same individual animal. Two pieces of parchment cut from one single sheep carry nearly identical mitochondrial DNA. Two pieces cut from two genuinely different sheep simply do not. For 70 straight years, matching scattered fragments together had relied almost entirely on educated guesswork. Now, for the very first time, there was actual physical evidence, real genetic fingerprints written directly into the material itself. Before 1947, the earliest available Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament anywhere in scholarly hands dated only to roughly 1000 CE. And for decades after this discovery, experts had debated endlessly over what these two divergent versions of Jeremiah actually meant. Was it perhaps an early rough draft, a later theological revision, or simply an honest scribal mistake somewhere along the way? The DNA evidence finally gave a concrete physical answer to a scholarly debate that had run unresolved for decades. The shorter version of Jeremiah was written on cowhide. The longer version was written on sheepskin. Different animals entirely, and almost certainly, by strong implication, different regions of origin as well. These were not simply two variant copies slowly drifting apart from one single shared original source over time. They represented two genuinely separate textual traditions, developed independently of each other, in two distinct communities, in two different parts of ancient Judea. Read that again, because it genuinely matters. Two separate communities effectively keeping two separate Bibles. The research team ran that same style of analysis on the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, a liturgical text describing angelic worship taking place inside a heavenly temple with copies of it, found both at Qumran and separately at Masada, the isolated mountaintop fortress where Jewish rebels famously made their final stand against Rome in 73 CE. The DNA results showed that multiple Qumran fragments of this exact same text had actually come from entirely different animals. This particular text, it turned out, was genuinely popular, widely copied and independently produced in multiple separate locations, rather than functioning as the tightly guarded property of just one isolated religious sect. Then came the kinship analysis, which added another meaningful layer to the picture. By examining specific nuclear DNA markers, the same kind of genetic markers used today to trace family relationships, researchers could sometimes identify sets of parchment that had come from closely related animals, genuine siblings or members of the exact same flock. Clusters of these closely related animals tended to point towards specific production centers, places where several different scrolls had clearly been produced from locally sourced skins within a fairly narrow window of time. And here is the detail that ultimately mattered most. Some of these tightly related animal clusters, clearly produced together from a single shared flock, turned up mixed directly in among other fragments, carrying no genetic relationship whatsoever, fragments that had come from entirely different animals belonging to entirely different flocks altogether. This was clearly not a collection that had simply grown organically out of one single central scriptorium. It had instead been gathered together from multiple distinct points of origin, representing multiple separate communities scattered across the wider region, spanning multiple decades, and quite possibly stretching across entire centuries. The old library theory did not just crack under that accumulated weight, it came apart completely. So here is what all of this evidence actually means when you step back and look at the full picture together. If the scrolls had genuinely come from just one isolated religious sect living permanently at Qumran, their sheer internal diversity would make almost no sense at all. Why would a single disciplined community bother carefully preserving competing versions of its own sacred scripture? Why hold on to texts representing theological positions it actively rejected, rather than simply discarding them outright? But if this collection had instead been gathered together from many different communities scattered across ancient Judea, brought together inside these particular caves gradually over the course of decades, and finally sealed away all at once during one specific catastrophic crisis, suddenly everything genuinely falls into place. The internal diversity is not some awkward this specific purpose. Now picture the surrounding geography for a moment. Jerusalem sits barely 20 miles from Qumran, a genuinely manageable journey by ancient standards of travel. When Rome laid siege to Jerusalem between 68 and 70 CE, Jews fleeing that citywide destruction may well have carried whatever sacred scrolls they could rescue out into the surrounding desert, adding them to a collection that other communities had already been quietly depositing there for generations beforehand. Family scrolls, synagogue scrolls, fragments representing an entire world being hastily rescued as everything familiar collapsed around the people carrying them. These caves, in other words, were almost certainly not the private archive of one single monastic order living apart from the wider world. They were a shared sacred library belonging to the whole of ancient Israel. And those cowhide fragments specifically proved something even more precise about exactly how that library actually came together. That these texts were physically traveling between genuinely distant regions, carried from wetter, more fertile land, somewhere to the north or west, all the way into the very heart of the Judean wilderness. This was clearly not some closed, inward-facing community quietly guarding its own private version of the truth. It was a living, breathing network of Jewish communities actively exchanging texts, ideas, and religious practice across real, meaningful geographic distance. What that finding means for the origins of Christianity is genuinely significant in its own right. The world Jesus was born into was not one of settled, comfortable theological agreement. It was a landscape of vigorous, geographically scattered religious debate with multiple communities, each one genuinely convinced it alone held the authentic tradition. The Dead Sea Scrolls were never simply the position paper of one single faction inside the larger ongoing debate. Taken together, they captured the entire argument itself, in all its messy, genuinely contradictory detail. For scholars of Scripture specifically, the deeper implications run even further than that. There was no single, universally accepted version of Jeremiah floating serenely above the fray. There were multiple versions, shorter and longer and differently arranged, each one treated as the fully authoritative form of Scripture by whichever specific community happened to be the one keeping and copying it. That same basic pattern held true for Genesis, for the Psalms, and for various prophetic books as well. Canonization was clearly not some finished process, simply handed down, complete from above. It was still actively underway at the time, still genuinely contested, still meaningfully unsettled. And now DNA evidence had proven that fact physically rather than merely theoretically. Separate communities and separate places were independently maintaining separate versions of what they each personally called the Bible. The underlying textual tradition was not fixed or frozen in place at all. It was alive, still evolving, and it looked meaningfully different depending on exactly where within that tradition you happened to be standing. The 2020 publication of this genetic research in the journal Cell opened up an entirely new chapter in Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship, one that is genuinely still being written today. What this new method made possible to ask for the very first time may ultimately end up mattering even more than what it managed to definitively settle on its own. Before this research began, there was simply no reliable way to scientifically confirm whether two separate fragments belonged to the same original manuscript, whether a given text had originated in one single place or many different ones, or whether separate scrolls actually shared any real physical connection beyond a loose surface similarity in subject matter. Now, for the first time, there genuinely is a way, and the technology behind all of this keeps advancing fast. Can researchers eventually pinpoint specific production centers for individual texts? Can they map out the entire geographic web of Jewish scribal communities that once stretched across ancient Judea? Can they trace in real physical detail how specific textual traditions actually move from place to place across the span of decades or even entire centuries? Researchers are already actively chasing these exact questions, expanding DNA analysis to a considerably larger set of fragments, pairing that genetic data together with multispectral imaging technology capable of recovering faded writing invisible to the naked eye, and steadily building reference databases of ancient animal DNA drawn from across the wider ancient Near East. The eventual goal is a geographic map precise enough that a single fragment could reveal roughly where in the ancient world the specific animal behind its parchment actually once lived. The work of properly reading the Dead Sea Scrolls, in other words, is genuinely not finished. In many real ways, it feels like it is only just now truly beginning. This genetic breakthrough represents something considerably bigger than simply settling one narrow archaeological argument. For 70 years, brilliant, deeply dedicated scholars examined these texts, using every tool genuinely available to them, deciphering ancient scripts, letter by careful letter, translating difficult and often obscure dialects, and painstakingly reconstructing pages badly damaged by 2,000 years of accumulated time and decay. That work was entirely real, genuinely valuable, and completely irreplaceable in its own right. But some specific questions remained permanently out of reach, no matter how carefully anyone looked, using those traditional methods alone. Handwriting analysis is inherently subjective by nature. Comparing parchment quality by eye alone is inherently imprecise. Textual criticism can spot meaningful patterns within the writing itself, but it cannot always definitively prove whether those particular patterns emerge from one single community or from many different ones scattered across an entire region. Molecular biology offered a genuinely different way into the problem, one nobody had seriously thought to try before that one ordinary conversation between two colleagues. By reading the genetic information locked quietly inside the very material these sacred texts happened to be written on, scientists finally managed to answer questions that had seemed permanently, hopelessly unanswerable using any of the traditional scholarly tools available before them. And what that evidence ultimately revealed turned out to be considerably bigger than anything the original research team had even hoped to find when they first started. The Dead Sea Scrolls, it turns out, are not simply the theological manifesto of one radical religious sect hiding out from Rome somewhere in the desert. They are the accumulated sacred literature of ancient Israel itself, gathered together piece by piece over multiple generations, genuinely diverse, actively contested, and deeply messily human in all of its internal contradictions. Multiple voices, multiple communities, multiple versions of the same scripture, each one carried into a cave in the Judean wilderness by someone watching their entire familiar world come apart around them. We only know any of this today because scientists finally learned how to read a story that was never actually written in the ink sitting visibly on the surface, but in the DNA of the animals whose skins had quietly carried that ink safely through 2,000 years of near total silence. Think about what that actually means for a second. This entire chapter of history sat completely invisible for 70 years, hidden inside a substance nobody thought to look at, waiting patiently for the right piece of modern technology to finally arrive and ask the right question. Ancient DNA sequencing was originally built to study human migration, mammoth bones, and prehistoric population movement. Nobody designed it with scripture in mind. And yet, the exact same laboratory tools, the same sequencing machines, the same genetic matching software used to trace where our ancient ancestors wandered thousands of years ago, turned out to be the missing key that finally unlocked one of the most stubborn puzzles in the entire history of biblical scholarship. That is genuinely one of the more remarkable things about modern science. The tools, built to answer one question, can quietly end up answering a completely different one nobody ever expected them to touch. And this story is far from over. Every single year, ancient DNA technology gets faster, cheaper, and more precise. What took this small international research team years of painstaking work back when they started may soon be possible in a fraction of the time with far smaller amounts of material and with far greater precision than ever before. As that technology keeps improving, more of these 25,000 fragments will likely get tested, more hidden connections will likely surface, and more of this quietly scattered 2,000-year-old library will likely get pieced back together, animal by animal, flock by flock, community by community. In 1947, a shepherd's stone broke open a clay jar and let an ancient world speak again for the first time in centuries. In 2020, a geneticist sequenced DNA pulled quietly from dust sitting inside a storage box and let that same world speak again in a language nobody had ever thought to listen for. The shepherd opened the door. The scientist finally heard, patiently waiting just behind it the entire time. And if you ask the researchers still working on this today, they will tell you plainly that this story, one that already reshaped what we thought we understood about the origins of the Bible itself, is genuinely still being written, fragment by fragment, sample by sample, one impossible cow at a time. In the year 2000, a team of geneticists sat down with a set of blood samples collected from 7 very different Jewish communities scattered across the globe, men whose ancestors had lived apart for nearly 2,000 years, separated by oceans, empires, and entirely different languages. Some had grandparents from Poland, others traced their families to Yemen, to Iraq, to Ethiopia, to the mountains of Kurdistan. On paper, these men had almost nothing in common except a shared religion. And yet, when the researchers read their Y chromosomes, the piece of DNA passed silently from father to son, generation after generation, something strange emerged. These men, despite centuries of separation, still carried nearly identical genetic fingerprints. And those fingerprints didn't point to Europe. They didn't point to Africa. They pointed to the Middle East. More specifically, they pointed toward the very people many assumed were their historical rivals. That discovery, published quietly in a scientific journal, would go on to spark one of the most fascinating and, at times, uncomfortable investigations in modern population genetics. Because what scientists were about to find wasn't just a story about one people, it was a story about all the peoples of the Middle East, Jews, Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, Druze, Bedouin, and the deep, tangled roots connecting them in ways that religion, politics, and history had long obscured. To understand why this mattered, you have to go back further than the year 2000. Questions about Jewish ancestry had actually fascinated and at times disturbed scientists for well over a century before that. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, a wave of so-called race science attempted to classify human populations into rigid biological categories, and Jewish people were frequently swept into these crude and now thoroughly discredited frameworks, sometimes described as a distinct race, sometimes as a religious group with no biological coherence at all. That era of science was built on flawed assumptions, and in the darkest chapters of the 20th century, was weaponized to horrifying ends. Modern population genetics, the kind practiced by the researchers in this story, operates on entirely different principles. It doesn't ask whether a group is a race in some fixed biological sense. The framework has been abandoned by mainstream science. Instead, it asks a much narrower and more answerable question. When you trace specific pieces of DNA back through generations, what patterns of shared ancestry emerge? And what do those patterns suggest about historical population movements? That distinction matters enormously because the answers this newer science produced would turn out to be far more interesting and far more nuanced than any of the old racial categories had ever allowed for. So, who exactly are the Jewish people, genetically speaking? Are they a religion that spread through conversion, absorbing whatever populations adopted its beliefs? Are they a single ethnic group that scattered from one homeland and somehow stayed biologically distinct for 2,000 years? Or are they something messier? A population shaped by both ancestry and faith, by migration and intermarriage, by isolation in some eras and mixing in others. For most of the 20th century, these questions were mainly the territory of historians and theologians, who had only fragments of evidence to work with, old texts, archaeological digs, and educated guesswork. But by the late 1990s, a new tool had entered the picture. Geneticists had learned how to read the Y chromosome, a piece of DNA found only in men, passed from father to son, largely unchanged except for the occasional random mutation. Because it doesn't get shuffled the way most of our DNA does, it acts almost like a time capsule, preserving a record of paternal lineage stretching back thousands of years. If a population had truly common ancestry, their Y chromosomes should carry telltale similarities even after millennia of separation. So a team led by geneticist Michael Hammer at the University of Arizona set out to test it. They gathered Y chromosome data from more than 1,300 men across 29 populations, spanning Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Among them were Ashkenazi Jews from Central and Eastern Europe, Roman Jews whose communities dated back to antiquity, North African Jews from Morocco and Libya, Near Eastern Jews from Iraq and Iran, Kurdish Jews, Yemenite Jews, and Ethiopian Jews. For comparison, they included non-Jewish populations from the same regions, including Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese Arabs, as well as Europeans, North Africans, and West Africans. When the results came back, even the researchers were surprised. Despite having lived in vastly different countries for up to 2,000 years, despite intermarriage, migration, and the slow drift of genetic mutation that time usually brings, most of the Jewish populations clustered tightly together. That in itself wasn't shocking. A shared origin followed by dispersal is exactly what Jewish tradition and history had always claimed. What was shocking was who they clustered with. On the genetic map the researchers produced, the cluster of Jewish populations sat almost on top of the cluster representing Palestinians and Syrians. Not near them, not adjacent to them, overlapping with them. Genetically, Jewish men and their Palestinian and Syrian neighbors were closer to one another than either group was to Europeans, to North Africans, or to Sub-Saharan Africans. Michael Hammer, the lead scientist, later admitted that even he hadn't expected the Middle Eastern signal to be this strong. Diaspora Jewish communities, separated for so long and living among such different populations, still carried a Y chromosome pool that pointed unmistakably back to a shared Middle Eastern point of origin, one they appeared to share most closely with Palestinian and Syrian Arabs. There was another detail buried in that same study that deserves attention, because it answers a question people often ask when they first hear this kind of result. How could a population maintain such consistent paternal ancestry after 2,000 years of living among completely different societies? Part of the answer lies in a quirk evidence of at least some genetic mixing with surrounding populations in every community examined. But the barrier was apparently strong enough and consistent enough to preserve a recognizable ancestral signature for 2 millennia. That finding alone would have been enough to reshape the conversation. But it wasn't the end of the story. A year later, a separate team led by geneticist Almut Nebel dug even deeper, using more detailed genetic markers to compare Jewish populations directly against Palestinian Muslim Arabs. Their results were even more specific. They found that roughly 70% of Jewish Y chromosomes and about 82% of Palestinian Muslim Arab Y chromosomes belonged to the very same genetic pool. In their own words, it reflected what they called a remarkable degree of genetic continuity in both Jews and Arabs, despite their long separation. Two populations that modern history often frames as adversaries were, at the level of the Y chromosome, closer to being long-lost relatives. Now, before going further, it's worth pausing on what this actually means and what it doesn't. A shared genetic pool doesn't mean Jews and Palestinians are the same population today, nor does it erase the very real and separate histories, languages, and cultures that developed over the following centuries. What it does suggest is a shared ancestral origin in the ancient Levant, the region encompassing modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, likely going back thousands of years before the events described in religious texts, long before the labels Jewish or Arab, as we understand them today, even existed. If the story had stopped there, it would already have been remarkable. But researchers kept pulling on the thread, and one particular discovery captured the public imagination more than any other, the case of the Kohanim. In Jewish tradition, the Kohanim are a hereditary priestly line, said to descend directly from Aaron, the brother of Moses, passed strictly from father to son for over 3,000 years. It's a lineage maintained not by choice but by birth, documented in religious practice long before anyone had a word for DNA. In the mid-1990s, geneticists decided to test whether this oral tradition of unbroken male lineage actually left a genetic signature. They analyzed the Y chromosomes of Jewish men who identified as Kohanim from communities as distant as Britain and Yemen, groups that had had no meaningful contact with each other for over 1,000 years. What they found was almost eerie. A striking number of these men, despite belonging to entirely separate diaspora communities, shared a specific and unusually consistent set of genetic markers on the Y chromosome, a pattern that came to be known as the Cohen modal haplotype. Using the natural rate at which small mutations accumulate over generations, researchers estimated that the common ancestor of these men lived somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, a date that lines up strikingly well with the traditional founding of the priestly line. It was one of the rare moments in science where a religious oral tradition, passed down for millennia with no written genetic proof, appeared to leave a measurable fingerprint in living DNA. It's important to be careful here, because this finding has sometimes been oversimplified or exaggerated in popular retellings. The Cohen modal haplotype is not found in all Kohanim, and it isn't unique to Kohanim alone. It also appears at lower frequencies in other Jewish and even some non-Jewish Middle Eastern populations. Later, research refined and complicated the original, simpler story. But the core finding held up under scrutiny, a meaningfully elevated concentration of this particular paternal lineage among men who, independently across scattered communities, identified as belonging to the same ancient priestly family. It remains one of the most compelling intersections of oral tradition and genetic science ever documented. By the early 2000s, scientists had strong evidence from the Y chromosome, but the Y chromosome only tells half the story, the paternal half. To understand the full ancestry of a population, researchers needed to look at maternal lineage too, tracked through mitochondrial DNA, which is passed from mother to child largely unchanged. And here, the story took an unexpected turn. When researchers examined the mitochondrial DNA of Ashkenazi Jews, the community whose ancestors settled in Central and Eastern Europe, they found something quite different from the paternal picture. A large share of Ashkenazi maternal lineages traced back not to the Middle East, but to Europe. Some studies estimated that a majority of Ashkenazi maternal ancestry could be linked to women who were likely of European origin, converts or partners absorbed into Jewish communities in the early centuries of settlement in Europe. In other words, the Ashkenazi Jewish population that would eventually become the largest Jewish community in the world appeared to have been founded, at least on the maternal side, on a mixture of Middle Eastern founding families and substantial European maternal input. This finding matters because it complicates any simple single origin story. It suggests that the history of the Jewish diaspora wasn't just a matter of one population moving intact from the Middle East to Europe and staying biologically sealed off for 2,000 years. Instead, it looks like small founding groups, likely primarily male in some migrations, settled in new regions and, over generations, were joined by local women through conversion, marriage, or both, creating populations that carried a strong middle. Eastern paternal signal alongside a more mixed, regionally influenced maternal one. It's a nuanced picture, and scientists continue to debate the precise proportions and timing, but the general pattern, Middle Eastern paternal roots layered with local maternal admixture in diaspora communities, has held up across multiple independent studies. Then, in 2010, came the most ambitious study yet, one that moved beyond the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA entirely, and instead looked at the whole genome. Hundreds of thousands of genetic markers scattered across all of a person's chromosomes, inherited from both parents. A team led by Dorn Bahar analyzed genome-wide data from 14 different Jewish diaspora communities and compared them against genetic data from 69 non-Jewish populations across Europe, the Middle East, the Caucasus, and North Africa. The results, published in the journal Nature, painted the most complete picture to date. Genetically, most Jewish diaspora populations from Ashkenazi communities in Europe to Sephardic Jews descended from those expelled from Spain to Mizrahi communities from Iraq and Iran.
that it is coming up, you know. So I'm going to say it, that there might be an abandonment issue that you have healed